Well, of all the holidays that mark the slow pendulum swing of a year, of all the smoky days of atonement and thanksgiving, of confession and continuity, of all the summonses that sound in the hearts of the sinners and the saints, of the faithful and the faithless, none of them, not Christmas nor Ramadan, Yom Kippur nor Easter, resonate more in the souls of the innocent, which is to say in the souls of children, than the summons that is sounded at the end of every summer on All Saints' Eve, All Hallows' Eve. Let me state the case for Halloween. It has been since I was a boy, was before that, and is still today a glorious day to be a child. Maybe the best of days, in its secular certainty, in its wicked and windy way. It might be one of the best days we'll ever know. Long unencumbered by the weight of religion, it beckons both the believer and the non-believer into the church of gluttony, into the scriptures of trick or treat, into the holy land of sugar. Like all holy quests, however, it's not an easy road. On Halloween, a child is required to leave safe things behind her, to trade the comfort of day for the chaos of night, to enter a world where candles flicker, leaves blow, hobgoblins scurry, and children must be brave. A world where memory rules and memories are made. Ask Dave, for instance. If you were to take Dave and put him in a witness box and make him swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help him God, and duly sworn, you were to ask him which of all the holidays he recalls from his boyhood, there would be no question at all. It would be nolo contendere, Halloween. And of all the Halloweens, of all the pumpkins in all of his life, the one he remembers best is his first Halloween ever. He's remembering it at the dining room table. His daughter Stephanie's come home for the weekend with her boyfriend Tommy. Saturday night. Dinner is over, but no one has left the table, and he's well into it. Kindergarten. Big Narrows Elementary. In the town of Big Narrows, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, it could have been yesterday. The school hallway transformed into a magical and bewitching place. Black construction paper witches with stuck-on autumn leaves. The most fantastic art he has ever seen. The exquisite and almost unbearable month-long build-up, and then the night itself, the school's Halloween party. The delicate terror of going to school after dark. Everyone's handed a bottle of pop at the door, which they dumped into a big soup pot to make a witch's brew. Cool, said Sam. Oh, it was very cool, said Dave. We were taken to the lunchroom, where they sat on the floor, the entire citizenry, and they watched the teachers, who were on the stage behind the backlit white sheet, all of them dressed as surgeons. And what were they doing? Pulling a string of sausages out of the principal's belly. After that, they were led one by one to the basement, into the terrifying haunted house that the grade 7s had built down there. Down the janitor's stairs, through the boiler room, along the narrow passage behind the furnace, past the flaking concrete foundation, all the spiders' webs, and finally into the janitor's lunchroom, where they were blindfolded. Sightless, they stuck their hands into the pot of teachers' brains, the bowl of stomach guts, and the jar of eyeballs. After that, they were led to the janitor's desk where, lit by a single candle, they stood in front of the fossilized cat that Stephen Kerrigan's father had found in the grocery store wall when they expanded the butcher shop. That's the Halloween I remember, said Dave. Hands down. Of all his yesterdays and todays, that trip to the basement stands out more than any Easter dinner, Thanksgiving supper, or Christmas morning, so help him God. But there have been others. Morley would tell you about the disasters. Tell one, said Sam. Well, for instance, the year your father waited until the last minute to get a pumpkin, and when he finally went out, every place he went to was sold out. Sam turned to Tommy and said, he came home with a watermelon. And he spray painted the watermelon orange, said Marley. And then he sat at the kitchen table and carved it. Disaster averted. Well, that wasn't even close to a disaster, said Dave. That wasn't even desperation. That was quick thinking. That's what that was. If it's disaster you want, said Dave, let me tell you about the Halloween I was 10. Well, that would be the October when 10-year-old Dave happened upon the stash of candy his parents had bought weeks in advance of Halloween. The beginning of that October, Dave's parents, Charlie and Margaret, were swept up in an uncharacteristic spasm of organization. Who knows how these things happen? Recognizing the dangers of what they'd done, Margaret hid the candy in the woodshed cabinet. She was hiding it from her husband as much as from her son, but it was her son who found it. The crime started out innocently with just one miniature Hershey bar. And can you blame him for that? And it was followed by just one more. And then, God help him, who among us would throw the first stone? One more after that. By the weekend, he'd eaten everything. Everything, said Tommy. Every last piece, said Dave. He ate it all, said Sam, looking at Tommy. Too afraid to say anything, Dave left the empty paper bag for his mother to find, which she did on Halloween night. And when she did, she summoned Dave into the kitchen, the courthouse of domestic discipline, where he was summarily tried, convicted, and sentenced. His punishment? He was sent out with a pillowcase to collect candy around the neighborhood and told to bring it home immediately so Margaret had something to hand out. You want to talk disaster, said Dave. But that wasn't the half of it. For that Halloween, the Halloween Dave was 10, the Halloween he ate his parents' stash and had to hand over all his candy in retribution, that Halloween was the Halloween Dave's sister Annie came home and dumped her bag of loot theatrically onto the living room floor, a full pillowcase, of chocolate bars and chips, licorice and popcorn. His little sister Annie, who was what? Was she 6? Was she 7? Well, I'll tell you what she was, said Dave. She was standing in the living room ankle deep in candy. And then she was sitting down in the middle of it, organizing it into piles. And when she had finished that, she went upstairs and she got a pad of graph paper. And she counted out how much she had in each pile. And as she counted, she shaded in the boxes on her graph. At the end of the night, she had an exact count of everything. She rationed it out, said Dave, so it lasted 365 days. As the months wore on, Annie's treasure trove became increasingly stale. But that was a minor annoyance, easily outweighed by her pride and the intense sense of satisfaction she got eating her daily ration under her brother's nose. Don't even think of stealing any, she said, waving her clipboard at him. I know exactly what I have here. She did share some of it. Before she had lugged her treasure upstairs that Halloween night to hide it in her room, she had done one last thing. She had meticulously removed all the items she considered undesirable. The apples, the boxes of raisins, those disgusting molasses kisses. And she had put them into a separate bag, which, in a magnanimous gesture of faux generosity, she allowed Dave to pick from. She salted the bag with just enough real candy to keep him coming back, and she made him pick in front of their parents, demonstrating to the entire family that she understood what it meant to share. You want to talk about a disaster, said Dave. That was a disaster. What about you, Mom? Said Sam. Where do I begin? Said Morley. Strangely, the world of dress-up has bedeviled Morley all her life. I say strangely because she does, after all, work in theater. You might think she'd be good at this. I'm not, said Morley. I'm horrible at costumes. And she's right. She is horrible. Nevertheless, when Stephanie was old enough to go out, Morley decided it was her motherly duty to make her daughter's costumes. Steph would begin talking about them in April. I want to be a unicorn Pegasus. I want to be a ballerina hippopotamus. I want to be 101 Dalmatians. The costume was always a moving target. In the spring, it changed by the week. In the fall, by the day. In October, it could change by the hour. The art of hitting a bullseye had less to do with aim than with knowing when to pull the trigger. The year Steph was 5, 101 Dalmatians seemed to be, well, if not close to the center, at least close to the target. Morley waited until the Monday before Halloween, however, before she committed. That afternoon, she went to a sewing store on her lunch break and sorted through piles of patterns and fabric. It took 3 days, but when she was done, she was sure she had made an awesome Dalmatian costume. It was awesome, said Morley. Maybe. But on Halloween night, when they got to the first house and the neighbor, who will remain nameless, opened her front door, she stared at Stephanie, who was standing there in all her Dalmatian splendor, and she blurted, "Wow! What a great cow costume." Stephanie burst into tears and cried the rest of the night, talking about disasters. But these are the moments you remember. Tell the next year, said Sam. Well, it wasn't the next year, said Morley. It was the year after the next year. The year I was Batman, said Stephanie to Tommy. And I was Robin, said Sam. It was the last time Morley made their costumes. That's for sure, said Morley. And sure enough, the very same neighbor is peering at them again. Let's see, said the neighbor, standing on her stoop, smiling. Batman and Robin, mouthed Morley, desperately at her neighbor, over her children's heads. Batman, mouthed Morley, pointing at Stephanie. Robin, she mouthed, resting her hand on Sam's shoulder. Let's see, said the neighbor, nodding triumphantly. You, she said, smiling at Stephanie, you are a rat. And you, she said, turning to Sam, you must be the exterminator. Sam's friend Murphy made their costumes the following year. No, he didn't, said Sam. I thought he did, said Dave. Dave was confused. He was thinking of the famous double costume grift. Murphy didn't make the costumes, but the sting was Murphy's idea. It was brilliant, said Sam. Here's how it worked. They each went out early, Murphy and Sam, I mean, and they each worked the houses around their own homes, solo. After an hour, they went back home, emptied their bags, met in the schoolyard, switched costumes, and went back and made another pass. It was double dipping, no doubt about it. More like reloading, said Sam. It was awesome. Stephanie developed her own traditions over the years, most of them defensive. On Halloween night, for instance, after she'd returned from her rounds, Stephanie would sit cross-legged in the middle of her pile, in the middle of the living room, and she would unwrap each item she had collected, lick it, and then rewrap it. It was a strategy designed to keep her brother away from her stuff. It took several hours, but when she was done, no one wanted to go near her stash, let alone eat it. Last year at this time, Dave confessed that it was him and not Sam who had been pilfering her candy over the years. It was for your own good, he said. But of all the Octobers, of all those years, there is one that stands out above the others. Tell that one, said Sam, looking at his sister. The first Halloween, Stephanie went out alone. Tell it, said Sam. I went as a crayon, said Stephanie. The year before, said Sam, she went as a pea. Green pea, said Dave. She wore a green cloth body, rounded out with wire, green tights, a green leafy headdress, and green face paint. Mommy, said Stephanie when she saw her costume for the first time, it's perfect. Well, that's because Morley didn't make it. Instead of making it herself, Morley had enlisted the help of a seamstress at the theater where she worked. And though it might have been great, it wasn't perfect. There's not a lot of turning room on a front porch when you're wearing a large wire-trimmed green body. Stephanie spent that Halloween, the year she was a green pea, wiping out little pink princesses and fairies with every turn. She left a trail of scattered candy and whimpering kids behind her. The next year, the first year she went out by herself, the year she's telling them about, all she wanted was to be tall and thin. She made her own costume that year out of poster boards. I'm a crayon, she said when she came downstairs. But she had miscalculated. She was such a tall crayon, she couldn't fit under porch roofs. She had to crawl up to at least half of the houses she visited. And if that wasn't bad enough, more than one father asked her if she was a stovepipe. It was the first Halloween I went by myself, said Stephanie. You went with Becky, said Sam. Without a parent, said Stephanie. They'd been out for about an hour when they started hearing the rumors about the Cupcake House, a brick house with a big wraparound porch in the next neighborhood, where they were giving away cupcakes with buttercream icing topped with crushed Smarties. Then they heard there was money baked into the batter. Then someone said you got a can of pop with every cupcake. We have to find it, said Stephanie. We aren't supposed to leave the neighborhood, said Becky. They hadn't actually seen anyone with a cupcake, but other kids had, or said they had. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone had heard something. Where exactly they had to go wasn't exactly clear. They set off, nevertheless. They crossed the street at the traffic light near the shoe store and into the next neighborhood, where the houses were bigger and further apart, and the streets were darker, and the children seemed older. They walked for a block, and then another, and Becky said, I don't like this. I have a feeling something bad is going to happen. But they kept walking for a half hour more until it was getting late, until a man walked out of the darkness toward them holding a small boy to his chest. The boy was screaming and squirming and kicking his feet. I think he's kidnapping him, said Becky. We should get out of here. And then a front door opened, and across the street another man leaned over the pumpkin on his stoop and removed the lid and blew out the candle inside it. He stepped back into his house, and the porch light snapped off. and the blue smoke from the candle curled into the darkness. Becky said, "I think we should go back now." Stephanie said, "We're not going back." Stephanie kept walking. Truth be told, she would have gone back, but she wasn't exactly sure where they were anymore. She wasn't sure how to go back. And that's when she saw it. The big house with the wraparound porch. "This is it," said Stephanie. "It doesn't have a pumpkin," said Becky, "or anything." But the porch light was on, and Stephanie was already heading up the walk. Becky was standing beside her on the porch when the old woman answered the door. The woman was wearing an apron. She was thin and stooped. She had a bowl of hard candies on a chair by the door. She held out the bowl and said, "Help yourself." As Stephanie chose a candy, the old woman said, "Take more." And then she said, "Would you like to come in for a moment?" Becky gasped, "Would you like a hot chocolate?" Becky stepped back. But Stephanie said, "Yes," and she dropped to all fours. She was already crawling through the door. Becky wasn't about to stay on the porch by herself, so Becky went in too. The lady took them into the kitchen, and she sat them down. She poured milk into a saucepan. She said that she wanted to get to know the children in the neighborhood. She said she had decided that tonight was the best night of the year to do it. "But you're the first ones who've come in," she said. The lady's name was Mrs. Gibson. They stayed maybe 15 minutes, and then they left. "That is so crazy," said Sam. "I wouldn't have gone in, not for $1,000,000. "I had a feeling," said Stephanie. "I could tell." This happened the Halloween Stephanie was 12. In the years since, Stephanie has seen Mrs. Gibson from time to time, once in Dorothy Woodsworth's bookstore, once in the library, and a couple of times on the street. When they see each other, they always say hello. Stephanie and Becky never got their cupcake, but Stephanie has always felt they did something good that night, something worthwhile by going in. It's the Halloween she remembers. She always will. A dark night, leaves swirling in the street, the moon rising behind the bare limbs of the trees. She crossed the street at the shoe store and stepped into a world of mystery and wonder. And she was never the same. When she came home, something had shifted. On a night made for children, she left her childhood behind. So here we are in another October. Let us carve pumpkins. Let us light candles. Let us cue the boys and cue the girls. Soon, the night of nights will be upon us. When it comes, let us cue the ghosts and cue the goblins. For when it does come, it is time for high adventure.